Well, let's go ahead and get started then. Thank you everyone so much for being here today. We are excited to have our fourth meeting of the task force. Thanks as well to everyone who joined last week for the optional meeting to discuss state statute. We're going to go over some of that, the results of that conversation in a little more detail, just to confirm that we're all on the same page. So that'll be one of the first items that we go over today. But before we get started, just let's do a quick round of introductions. If you could just share your name, your organization, and then your favorite wintertime activity that you like to enjoy this time of year. So Julia Newman, Lotus Engineering and Sustainability. And I'm not much of an adrenaline junkie, so like snowshoeing is way more my pace than skiing. So snowshoeing, and then in a normal year, I should say snowshoeing and enjoying like a hot toddy afterwards is something that I really enjoy in the winter. I'll pass it over to Kim, and then we can just go through. I'll kind of call you out as I see you on my screen.
Great. Kim Burke from the Colorado Energy Office. I am a big skier, so I hope to be doing more of that. Hopefully we'll get more snow, and I did just buy some AT gear, so I hope to be actually going up the mountain as well and going down. So I'll pass it over to Diane.
Thanks, Kim. Diane Ernst with Lotus. Yeah, I guess I'm a big skier as well. I grew up in the Midwest, so coming out to Colorado, this is real skiing. So I like to enjoy that every chance I get. Crystal.
Hi, everyone. Crystal Eichelkamp, benchmarking program associate with the Colorado Energy Office. I'm not very active in winter, especially with skiing or anything like that. So I guess mine would be just eating lots of warm food and drinking hot chocolate and such. I'm not sure who's next, so I'll pass it back to Julia.
Oh, sure. And I can definitely get behind eating all the cozy foods in winter. John, you're the next one I see on my screen, John Lauer.
Lauer with Newmark. I actually am not a fan of the snow, so I don't have a great winter activity. Sorry.
No, all good. It could be, sitting inside.
I guess it would be going somewhere that has an ocean. That would be my ideal.
There you go. I like it. Bill Green. Oh, Bill, you're muted.
Got to mute. Yeah, there we go. Bill Green with the RMH Group, a mechanical engineer representing American Council of Engineering Companies. And I've been skiing since I was little, Colorado native, and so I love going up to the slopes too. Thanks.
Awesome. I've heard a couple of people say they're going to get shirts for Christmas that say you're muted or you're on mute. Kara.
Kara Carmichael with RMI. I wish there was a mute button for my children sometimes. He needs to invent that. But yep, skiing, and I also love playing ice hockey.
Oh, fun. All right, Tracy Phillips.
Yeah, hi, Tracy Phillips. I'm the director of the Colorado CPACE program. I am a knuckle dragger, and I'm actually going up to Crested Butte tonight, so I'm excited to get on the slopes. And fantasy football is my other passion during the winter.
Love it. Jenny.
Jenny Gonzalez, IBEW. I am Union Electricians, IBEW, electrician by trade, Colorado native, not a skier, not a fan of the cold at all, but I do roller skate year round, so I do at least enjoy the indoor roller skating rinks.
Oh, that's awesome. My husband just got a pair. He hadn't done it since he was like in high school, and then he was like, I'm doing it. I was like, do it. That's great. Karen.
Karen Hancock, City of Aurora, and I moved out here to ski, but I love backcountry skiing. I'll snowshoe. I will take a walk in the winter. I am a cold weather person, and I hate the heat. So, and then the other favorite activity is just sleeping. I sleep better in the winter. So,
relishing it all. Thanks, Karen. Paul.
Hi, well, I had major back surgery 4 years ago, so unfortunately my skiing days are done. So I'll share a favorite past wintertime activity. I grew up in New England, so pretty much every day after school, hike through the woods and skate on the pond. I still remember those days so vividly.
Love it. Cecil.
Cecil Courtney, pipe fitters, local 208. Don't really do too much in the outdoors over the winter, so just enjoy staying warm inside and watching it be cold outside.
That's the best thing to do. Christine.
Oh, I'm with Cecil. My favorite thing to do is read a book inside while my house is quiet when my husband and my daughter go play out in the snow because they are immune to the cold and I'm not.
Know your strengths. Kate.
Kate Townley, Built Environment Specialist with CDPHE. I love snowboarding. I hate traffic. So snow staying to the slopes for me is a good day.
Awesome. Stacy.
Afternoon, everybody. Stacy Bumgarn, Campus Energy Coordinator at Colorado State University in Fort Collins. And my favorite wintertime activity is shamelessly drinking hot chocolate.
Very good one. Will.
Will tour with the Colorado Energy Office. In a normal year, it would be backcountry skiing, but I'm afraid this year it's still mountain biking.
Yeah, not much snow to do it yet. Hopefully soon. Eric.
Yeah, hi, Eric Jeanette with Iconergy. My favorite time is winter when I get to ski, backcountry, downhill, telemark, you name it. I love it.
Awesome. And Mark. Oh, unmute.
Yep, also with Iconergy, and I would second Eric's. I grew up in Pennsylvania and moved here for the skiing. So I snowboard, ski, snowshoe, cross country ski. Do it all now. I have fantasies about doing some winter camping.
All right, you're brave. I love it. Katrina.
Hi, everyone. Katrina Manigan. I lead the Buildings and Homes work for Denver's Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency. I'll echo skiing. I also really like riding my bike in the snow. My mountain bike, road biking on ice is terrifying, but I love mountain biking around on snowy trails. I don't have a fat bike, but it still goes.
That sounds fun. Joel.
Joel Danforth, United Power, also a fellow knuckle dragger. I am getting older, so I have to plan a few days of recovery afterwards, though.
Only skied a couple times, and every time I've needed a few days of recovery afterwards. Kirk.
Kirk Longstein, Fort Collins Utilities. I'm assuming the prompt is, what do we like to do in the wintertime? Sorry, I missed that, but everyone's shaking. Yeah, our family, we got family snowshoes this year, and so snowshoeing and hot toddies.
You missed it. That was mine.
Hot toddies for the kids too, Kirk?
That's to get me through the day with the kids.
Maybe they get cocoa. Kathy.
I have to find the unmute button. Hi, everybody. Kathy Barsner, NAIOP, Colorado, Commercial Real Estate Development Association. And I, too, am one of those who would prefer to stay indoors, preferably near the fireplace with a very good book and single malt something, a couple fingers, or the hot toddy would also work.
Very cozy. Michael.
Michael Gifford, Associate General Contractors. So again, commercial building, general contractors, specialty contractors, and the suppliers. And it sounds like the question is what we like to do in the snow. So mine is still fly fishing all 12 months of the year. And when it snows, then putting on the snowshoes and going to the fly fishing, and then maybe some of the warm up activity that were previously described after I get home.
Love it. Love it. And last but not least, Nori.
Hi, everyone. I keep getting kicked out. I think our power is fluctuating here, but I am attempting to learn backcountry skiing. I'm terrible at it. And I forgot to mention that I work for Boulder County Housing Authority, so I'm representing the affordable housing community poorly in the backcountry with my skiing skills. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Nori. I don't think I missed anyone, but if so, please speak up. Okay, great. Thank you all for being here. And we appreciate you all having your cameras on as well. That's great. We are going to be doing some breakout sessions for our conversation today. So it'll be really good to get into smaller groups and be able to have some more focused conversations among us. So as much as you can, having those cameras on, I think is very, very helpful today. But we also know with this crazy storm that's coming through, if it's going to be compromising your bandwidth and your ability to participate to keep your camera on, then please do take it off as needed so that you can continue to at least hear us and participate in the conversation verbally. Great. Diane, if you want to pop up the PowerPoint presentation really quick, we'll just go over a couple of kind of general housekeeping items. So our objectives for today are first and foremost, I think you need to switch. There we go. Perfect. Thank you. Our first and foremost to review the information that was on the state statute that was discussed at the optional meeting last week. So again, thank you to everyone who joined. I think we had really good representation from the task force there. So I'm really glad everyone was able to participate. So really, we're just going to kind of confirm what was discussed and hopefully make sure that we're all on the same page so that we can move forward and start actually developing some of these BPS policies for the state. We'll confirm the remaining guiding goals, which we started to do at the last meeting. And then we had to switch over to the presentation from IMT and NBI, so we didn't have time to finish that. So we'll chat about those goal statements. And then we'll start to review and discuss further the appropriate metrics. So that's when we'll break into breakout rooms so we can have those small and focused conversations. We'll go into more detail on this when we get to that, but we'll actually also be asking people from each breakout room to be reporting out. And then hopefully we'll be able to confirm a BPS metric, knowing that we can have multiple metrics. But hopefully we can confirm those so that we can start moving forward into our development of those standards. Again, always same meeting norms as normal. As I mentioned, if you need to turn your camera off today in order to preserve some of your bandwidth, please do. And then just please remember to leverage your expertise, not your position or connections. And we really do want you to share your thoughts and share the space. So we look forward to hearing from everyone, especially in those small groups today. Just a reminder of the task force goals and outcomes. Again, we are looking for reducing emissions sector-wide for covered buildings 7% by 2026 and 20% by 2030, excuse me. And at the same time, developing BPS that are equitable, low carbon, and clean energy while we're reducing pollution from GHGs, lowering energy costs, and improving indoor AQ. Just kind of setting the stage a little bit there. I'm going to pass it over to Kim and Diane to go over just the findings and the results of our conversation last week.
Thanks, Julia. Yeah, we just kind of wanted to give a kind of quick recap of the December 9th optional meeting that we had. And thank you to everyone who could attend. I think it was a really good discussion. We do want to just do a recap and then try to, again, move folks forward so we can actually get into the details and talk about the metrics we'll actually use to develop the building performance standards. But just to recap, we did discuss that the greenhouse gas emissions reduction target is for covered buildings that are required to annually benchmark their energy use. And the target is for the sector as a whole. So it's not for individual buildings. So an individual building is not necessarily going to have to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions 7% by 2026 and 20% by 2030. It's really for that whole covered building sector overall. Secondly, the greenhouse gas emissions reduction target does include both Scope 1, or on-site direct emissions from fossil fuel combustion, and Scope 2, indirect emissions from purchased electricity emissions. Just another point, building owners will use Energy Star Portfolio Manager to track their energy use and submit their annual reports to the Colorado Energy Office. So the data that we're going to be using to assess whether or not buildings are meeting the targets that we develop for them will be through those benchmarking reports and Energy Star Portfolio Manager. The baseline year for the building performance standards is calendar year 2021. So this will include energy consumption data from the 2021 benchmarking data, which of course we do not have yet, but we will be getting, and until then, we'll be estimating some of that data. However, the state does plan to use the emissions factors for target years 2026 and 2030 to measure the reductions achieved, and a little bit more about that. The Energy Office in the state is interpreting the statute this way due to the intersection of the language, which requires the 20% reduction, but also requires that the reduction comes from actions from buildings, not from the decarbonization of the grid due to utility actions. Another point about that is that if we were to use the 2021 emission factors, it's going to be really challenging for building owners to meet, since it would require a much larger percentage reduction than what might be feasible for building owners, since the grid will be a lot cleaner in future years and electricity emissions will go down significantly. There was a question or a few questions posted on Monday.com and during the last meeting about Energy Star Portfolio Manager and the emissions factors that it uses. Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment will likely collect greenhouse gas emissions factors through the clean heat plans that Colorado utilities will be filing. And the state plans to use these more localized emissions factors rather than the regional emissions factors that are provided in Energy Star Portfolio Manager eGrid regions. So just to clarify again, each building does not need to individually meet the greenhouse gas emissions reduction target. We don't intend for building owners to have to use these target year emissions factors to calculate the emissions reductions from planned projects. Really, the goal for the task force is to select metrics and pathways for building owners to take action to reduce energy use and emissions and become more efficient, increase their efficiency. The state on the back end will calculate the portfolio emissions reductions to ensure that they meet the statutory target. So really the goal for this task force is to recommend a metric such as a target energy use intensity EUI that's easy to understand for building owners that they can use to plan, take action, and measure their progress. The metric is intended to be transparent, and it's not intended to be a dynamic target for building owners based on the building type or whatever considerations the task force wants to include, although it can have some kind of trajectory pathway to obviously increase reductions over time. But we are going to discuss as a group what those pathways are that buildings can take. And we'll start some of that discussion today, and certainly look to do that in future meetings as well. So again, just to reiterate, on the back end, the state is going to, with some outside technical expertise, we'll conduct analysis to calculate what the collective emissions reductions from the entire covered building sector, what those reductions look like, and ensure that the building performance standards and metrics that we come up with will meet those statutory targets. So we'll obviously have some help with looking at projections and models for how buildings will comply with the various pathways that we develop and that the task force recommends. So we'll also take into other considerations, of course, such as the amount of new construction, increased load, things like that. But we'll be doing that modeling, again, with some outside technical expertise to ensure that we are meeting the statutory goals of greenhouse gas reductions. I hope that's a helpful summary and recap. And we can take some questions now. I think Kara has a question.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. That's really helpful clarification. That I heard things there that were much clearer than I have in the past. So thank you for that. I'm wondering what the timing is on that analysis and if we need it in order to set these BPS targets so we know that we're meeting it.
Yeah, we are actually working, so Iconergy will help somewhat. And then we're also likely going to be working with Group 14 to do some additional technical analysis. The plan is to adapt the policy design tool that they actually developed for the City and County of Denver, and to do some additional technical analysis there for us. So we hope to get them on board sometime earlier in the new year. Bill?
Yeah, I was curious why the e-grid for this region isn't being used, because that seems to be a better measure of power that we could be using, in this region versus through local utilities?
Well, the plan is for now that we will get those actual emission factors through utility clean energy plan filing. So I think that's actually going to be more accurate. Their e-grid region includes other states such as Wyoming, which are much more coal heavy. So I don't think it would be an accurate representation of the emissions here in Colorado. So that's the plan for now. And we can certainly look into that a little bit more as we move forward.
Okay.
Any other questions? And Bill, you can put your hand down if you don't have any more right now. Yes, Katrina.
I guess I would just flag, I still have questions on how the overall target for this task force is calculated, but I think actually having the tool will help. But it still seems to me that the legislation is really clear that this is a 20% reduction below the emissions in 2021. And so it's not here on the slide, but I think you said that you plan to calculate that using
the 2026 and 2030 emissions factors, simply because if we do the math, it's going to be extremely difficult for buildings to meet that overall reduction if we simply use the emissions factors from 2021. We think yeah.
I mean, I do know that it's harder. It's just that that's what it says, is that it's a 20% reduction below 2021 emissions. And so I guess I want us to develop the right policy. I don't want to belabor this, but I would really appreciate if the tool that gets built lets us look at both of those interpretations and think about what it would take to really reduce emissions 20% below the actual emissions from 2021, because that's what the legislation says to me. I wasn't part of it, so I don't know anything about legislative intent, right? It just seems really clear to me on that point. But I don't want to belabor it. I do want us just to come up with the right solution.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think that through our technical analysis, we probably could do some some calculations to show both and see what is really achievable for building owners. So fair point. Thank you. Any other questions?
Great.
All right, thanks.
All right. Well, we thought just building off of that, it's helpful to kind of see where we're headed, and just knowing that we'll have, plenty of times to meet together and other ways to connect to continue these conversations. And as Kim said, to develop those pathways and to discuss alternate pathways. This group has asked some great questions, so we always appreciate that. So it seems you all are thinking super critically and thinking outside of the box. So we definitely appreciate that. So there'll be definitely room for more conversation moving forward. So just to give you some high level, maybe of the next few months. So in January, as Kim stated, iConergy will be presenting some initial data, and Overlay will also be presenting some covered buildings data. So we'll be able to kind of continuously see that bigger picture to help this group make decisions as necessary. And then we'll be moving into different compliance pathways. We'll definitely be diving into workforce and equity considerations, and then discussing programs and penalties, and then moving into reviewing and discussing those recommendations. But just this slide is really just to reiterate that we have lots of room and opportunity to continue these conversations. Our hope that was that Kim would make that really clear about the overall goal, so that we can continue to move forward and make decisions around the BPS. So we thought it might be good to do a quick fist to 5. This is just asking if we're comfortable with the statute and the understanding of our overall goal, so that we can move forward as a group. So if we could do a quick fist to 5, I guess for this one, let's just do it with hands, and then it might just help. Kurt,
Can you repeat the question, Diane? Sorry.
Yeah, for sure. So this is just asking if based on what Kim's presentation and the notes from the last optional meeting, just based on the statute and the overall goals, are we comfortable moving forward as a group, or do we still feel stuck on the overall goals? Kurt, go ahead if you have a question.
If you could leave your hands up for just a minute or two so I can count them as your, okay, go ahead, Kirk.
I'm okay to move forward. One of those timeline statements was around penalties. And I think, I didn't think that this task force was able to make recommendations based on penalties. Is that still the case? Or?
That is the case. I might have missed where we talked about penalties. Sorry about that.
It might have been in the
in the previous slide
on the upcoming syllabus.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I apologize. That might have not been the most updated one, and that's 100% my fault. But that I will, when we send out the meeting notes, I'll send the final updates to the upcoming topics that we'll be discussing. Thanks, Kirk.
All right, perfect. Thank you, everyone. I think we had one or two folks that had a 2, and I'm wondering if we have reached consensus. We go for a 2/3 majority, and we have reached that. We've got 14 folks that said they're comfortable with signaling a 3 or above. So that's great. If anyone who is still not quite comfortable has some additional questions that you want to pose at this point, or concerns, then please share them if you're comfortable, and we can either address them now, or if we don't have the answer at this point, then we'll loop back with you shortly after.
Jenny Gonzalez, IBEW. As always, my main and foremost concern is the individual worker and labor person. I still haven't heard anything about how we keep a just transition from the old-time gas worker to this new time renewable energy worker. Very interested. That's why I'm here. I can be convinced, but not gonna just be easy.
Yeah, and I think Jenny, you bring up a great point. And I think, I hope that we displayed that we'll have room to discuss that in like the workforce meeting. We'll also be doing some extensive public engagement to discuss that. And we'll be getting outside feedback from workforce and bringing that back to this task force in order to ensure that those voices are heard. But do you feel okay about the overall goal, or do you think that more needs to be okay.
No, absolutely.
Yeah,
I'll get there. It takes me a moment, but I'll get there.
Thanks, Jenny.
Yeah, and we really value that you are part of this group and bringing that voice. It's definitely something that we have that full meeting of workforce and equity considerations. But I think this is something that, as we start to talk about the specifics of the compliance pathways, starting in meeting 5 in January, then that's something that we really want to hear what concerns are coming up. We'd like as much as possible to be able to, understand what they are and what our opportunities are so that we can be integrating that into all of our conversations, so that when we get to that meeting that is specifically devoted to workforce and equity, we have some pretty specific items that we're going to be able to tackle as a group. So I thank you for being a part of this and sharing those thoughts as we keep moving forward. Great. Well, so it sounds like in that case we are good to go on the statute. Of course, if there's additional questions, and Kim will keep us all abreast of the work that the state and Group 14 are going to be doing to do those calculations on the back end. So we'll have lots of updates as we keep moving forward on that. And I think that there's always, of course, the opportunity if additional questions come up, please ask them, podiummondmonday.com. But I'm glad that we've kind of all gotten to a space where we feel we're on solid standing and understanding this, and we can now build off of that to select our metrics and everything. So that's great. Perfect. All right. So with that being said, I think our next thing to go over is really diving into the guiding goals. So if you remember back to meeting 3 last month, we started to discuss the guiding goals. We got through the equity guiding goals. We did adopt those all as a group. We've got 4 or 5 more sections of guiding goals to get through. So we're going to be moving through this as quickly as we can. And I think we'll still have a lot of questions that I think about specifically the how of some of this. We're going to make sure that some of this happens. And I welcome you to please share those questions and thoughts. And then as we know that we won't necessarily have the answers today, but these are all things, again, that provide fodder and discussion topics for our future conversations. Yeah, Stacy, go ahead while I pull up the PowerPoint.
Yeah. Just real quick, I guess I'm curious, we've been using the word we're going to vote on these goal statements, and how fixed is this? I mean, like, if we continue, we keep talking about how we have all these meetings in the future where we're going to learn more information and discuss more details. And so, I mean, are these goal statements kind of a living document for our task force, for the life of our task force, or are they kind of one and done, and then we're in a position where we need to be sure we don't violate them in some other of our considerations or conversations?
Oh, that's a really good question. I would say that they are, if it's possible, I would say kind of both and. So they really do provide us with sort of the guardrails, if we think about it. In a bowling lane, like, they prevent us from going into the gutters and going the wrong direction on some of our recommendations. But I don't think that we need to, I don't think that we need to stop ourselves from revising them if we find, we've forgotten to address something that's very important here, or we, want to make sure that we call out the needs of a specific group or a specific audience. I think we can still do that in the future, but I would say as much as possible today, what we vote on are those guardrails, are the things that tell us as we're developing the BPS in our future conversations, what are we trying to achieve in addition to our emissions reductions with it. Does that make sense? Okay, great. Perfect. So under workforce, we have 4 guiding goals. Building right off of our previous discussion here, everything that is in italics is something that has been changed based on either suggestions in monday.com or that we were emailed by task force members, or under the last bullet, the conversation that we had, because we did start to talk about the workforce goals at our last discussion as a group. So with that, we added to that last bullet, really calling out what we mean by, I think we had originally just underserved communities or underserved business owners. So we've detailed specifically kind of what we mean by that: underserved, people of color, low income. And then we also did address having multiple languages in our education and training resources under this goal statement as well. Michael, I think you brought up a great point last time, or perhaps it was Stacy. I know both of you, I think kind of spoke to this as to how exactly we will be doing that and what exactly we mean by support. And I think that's something that that's one of those questions that we will continue to talk about as we talk about compliance pathways and as we talk about programs that will support the achievement of the BPS standards. So I don't think we need to have the answer today as to like what exactly we mean by, supporting the transition and providing equitable access. So Paul, I saw your hand first, and then Kirk.
Yeah, thanks. I know I raised this issue before, but before anything is installed, it has to be designed. So it's important to me that workforce includes the design community, both architecture and engineering.
Thank you very much. You did bring that up, and I apologize that we forgot to make that change here. Is there somewhere within one of these bullets specifically that you would see calling out the design community is fitting and well, or does it deserve its own separate bullet?
I'd almost think of it as it's a separate bullet, because really it's where it starts in a lot of ways.
Perfect. Okay. So, and could that be something along the lines of ensure the design community is educated and informed on BPS and provided the tools to support implementation?
Yeah, something on those lines. That sounded great. Bill, okay. I'm sure you've got some thoughts too, but to me, it's important to get it in there.
Perfect.
And I didn't know if maybe the third bullet got to that, because that is the workforce, the existing workforce and new workforce that needs to be in design and architecture. So I didn't know if we could do something with the third bullet for that.
Yeah, possibly.
Kirk, please go ahead.
I'm just curious, based on Jenny's comments, if these bullets kind of address that transition that she was speaking to. Sorry, Jenny, to put you on the spot, but I'm just curious if these are specific enough to address some of those comments.
And bouncing on to him too, I was wondering if that was what you were including in bullet number 3. Because you are
the space I was thinking. Yeah, go ahead.
You are talking about ending careers to start a new career. So is that existing workforce aware of upcoming changes?
I wonder if you can add on to that bullet to incorporate that, to say is aware of the upcoming changes and is prepared for something that the transition.
Oops, sorry about that.
Okay. And I think to Jenny's point that they already have a skill set. You're just figuring out how to get that skill set to a new position. So maybe transferring, or I'm not very good at the word part of it, but
ideally you're going to want to not let the Excel apprentice go into his first year apprenticeship when 6 years down the road, he's not going to have that well of a job or a sustainable career. So how do we address that? It's an extremely important, it's an important factor to address. There's a whole workforce out there that we might be at an advantage because we are electricians, but I don't want to see the rest of my brothers and sisters out there who do construction roads as a trade just go to the wayside because they didn't choose the right field. So please take into consideration, you do have gas workers out there, you do have pipe fitters out there, you have pole workers out there. You want to close all these places, then put these people in a spot where they can successfully end their career out, where they can keep their pensions, where they can keep their benefits. Don't just leave them behind. How we get there, that's what you guys are here for also, so please.
And I guess these are should be quality positions. I'm thinking what Jenny was mentioning is you don't want somebody underemployed. So if we could get to something where we're not transferring somebody who has a high skill set in oil and gas and then they get downgraded to a minimum wage job in a new industry. So just making sure that that's equitable transfer of skills so that they're not underemployed.
I'm curious if we can add to the front end of that bullet point, conduct education and promote opportunities. With that,
educational incentives are always awesome. People always listen to the money behind it too.
To your point, Jenny, around folks having those opportunities, sometimes those opportunities aren't always access to those opportunities is not always equitable in that case. So how do we kind of promote opportunities in an equitable space? Equitable way.
Does this new language kind of address that? So we've noted transfer of skills into quality positions, having that just transition and promoting opportunities. Have we included everything? Is there something else that we need to call out specifically here?
So seeing that supported just transition, it's kind of the generic thing that gets us by. So thank you for including it. Thank you for listening, guys.
Of course. And Jenny, is this, is supported just transition, is that specific enough? I know sometimes.
I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of like, I don't mean to downgrade it as a generic saying, but it does get us to the point where everybody is kind of included in that transition without being let go or left behind in an unfair manner.
Okay, great. It's hard to know. Sometimes generic terms are really useful and sometimes they can be the opposite of that. So, but if it is a useful one to include, then I think let's do that. Katrina, go ahead.
I might just add a little bit more focus on helping under-resourced communities and particularly young people find paths into this work. One of the big things the Energize Denver Task Force talked about was that this transition in existing buildings will generally just be creating more work in this space to electrify buildings, more work to improve their energy efficiency. And how do we make sure under-resourced communities move into that opportunity was a much bigger focus for them than an equitable transition, because this, pipe fitters install heat pumps. And so this isn't necessarily going to be displacing anyone, is what they sort of settled on. So I think having that just transition language in there is fine, but I would really focus on, as this space grows and there are simply more jobs, how do we get under-resourced communities opportunities to move into those jobs would be sort of a separate focus that I would add. That's just not maybe as strong here as I would like.
Can we get to partnering with the folks who know how to do this? I don't know how to do this, but I know Jenny would know how to do this. So if we partner with the types of organizations that can help us with that one, if there's a place to put
Is that covered here under work with local education entities and infrastructure? We could add in partner organizations. Yeah. Jenny, go ahead.
I'd start as young as high school level. And at a high school level, you have the opportunity to grab onto those one, incoming workers who do believe as well as we do in the renewable energy factor. Two, you have that young, excited labor force at that point in time. Three, you can pull out of the high schools that don't have as much money. Go straight to DPS, go to the lower income inner city schools, go to West High School, go to North High School, start making differences in young people's lives since then.
Great. Okay. So I added partner entities and specifically called out trade organizations and unions here. And then I added young, and maybe Katrina, one other thing I heard you say, we have in this bullet, equitable access to education and training resources. And maybe we're also looking for job opportunities. So equitable access to education, training resources, and job opportunities. Would that kind of cover what we're looking for?
Yeah, I think so.
Julie, I have just a minor edit to suggestion, that first bullet point. I work with school districts all around the metro area, and technical high schools is kind of becoming an anachronistic term. Career technical education is becoming rapidly distributed across entire districts. So I would just change that to school districts. And I think that school districts in the metro area would love to have a role to play in this. So I think you can just get rid of technical high schools. Great.
Perfect. All right. Great. And Kathy, go ahead, and I'm going to try and capture what we talked about with the design community here.
Yeah, I don't know if this is a goal or a tactic, but we need to normalize sending kids to trade school after high school without making them feel like they're less than the four-year university kids. And I know this is something that we just have to figure out how to do. So like I said, I don't know if this is a goal that needs to go in this section or if this is a tactic that we need to address going forward. But we need to convince not only the kids, but their parents that they're making a wise future choice to go into trade school, and that they're not failing because they didn't follow their friends who are going to a four-year university somewhere.
Yeah, I like that point, Kathy, although I'd observe, I think that change, that shift is happening pretty rapidly in the public education sector. I think literally every district in the metro area has really jumped onto career technical training in a big way. And it is pretty much offering that message you just shared, that these are really valuable career pathways that students should consider.
Could we add to the first bullet then vocational on that last sentence? Facilitate vocational training programs or trade or whatever the right word is there. So it's not a four-year college, although we want them in here too. But I think that's the pipeline, right? That I've heard is that you want to start at high school and then do the training right after.
Okay, perfect.
And good job on that list bullet point, by the way. I think that's pretty solid now.
Great. Okay. I do want to make sure we have the time to discuss and vote on the remaining types of guiding groupings of guiding goals that we have. So on this one for workforce, any last changes that we want to make before we do a quick fist to 5 on these? All right. Great. Well, hearing none, we'll have you put your votes in the chat this time. That way, That way, Diane can quickly pull them, and we don't have to have you sit there with your hand in front of your face for a few minutes. So if you could just go ahead and throw those into the chat, that would be great. That way we also have them on record. And Michael, I see your comment in the chat on some of the partnerships that the AGC has done. So we'll make sure that that is noted in the notes as well, so that we've kind of got something to build off on the discussion when we start going into talking about workforce opportunities. Okay, perfect. I'll leave those up for just another second. It looks like we've got almost everyone coming in, so thank you for that. And perfect. So we will consider these. I think it looks like we've got most folks folks are on the same page. Stacy, did you want to speak to your concern at all?
I don't need to. I guess I think we're having a great discussion. I'm just not sure who the goals are for. And so, again, if they're going to be public, if these goals are going to be guiding entities other than this task force, then these words and the details and the language really matters. And then we're probably not spending enough time on them. If we're just trying to create guardrails for this task force, we might be closer to understanding one another than all of the words are suggesting, maybe, or I hope. But anyway, I think I'm fine. I'm just not sure who the goals are for.
Okay, and yeah, the goals are more for us as a task force to be those guiding guardrails as we go forward and develop the BPS. I think it would take, I agree, quite a bit more wordsmithing and conversation to make sure that these are something that we want to put out there for other entities. But no, these are more for guiding our conversations. That's helpful. Great. So I am going to move us forward to our engaged and informed community goals. So a couple of changes that were made. We had a suggestion to provide multiple opportunities for feedback. So I integrated that into beginning outreach early and making use of existing communication channels such as Denver's work. And then this last bullet of making recommendations and requirements, making sure recommendations and requirements are easily understood by all audiences and include considerations of equity issues, the use of multiple languages, inclusive messaging. I moved that up from, we had that under streamlined process before, and I think it fits better here. It might be a little redundant with that one that's above it, so we could combine those if that feels appropriate. But for the next 5 minutes, any broad comments on these ones that can get us to a space where we're all in agreement on them?
The second one and the last one seem a bit repetitive, but that's okay.
Yeah, we could certainly combine them. Make it a little less wordy.
Yeah, and I'll just mention the first bullet also includes multiple languages, so we seem to have that sprinkled throughout.
Mm-hmm.
We do, yes, you are correct about that. How about
and equities used several times. I don't know if it needs to be.
Does that get it? kind of combining those needs of that second and fourth bullet, or excuse me, second and fifth. Kirk, go ahead.
Does it make sense? And I don't even know if this is something that we can do, but to commit task force members to carry the message into the community?
I am so glad you asked. So we'll actually dive into that a little more in the 5th meeting in January. We're going to discuss the public engagement process in more detail. But long story short, absolutely yes, we would be very supportive and encouraging of task force members to go out and spread the word and share communications and get feedback. I think as much as we've, we have a few public engagement and outreach processes included in our scope of work for Lotus in supporting this work. But I don't think that we'll get everyone's voice through the amount that, the limited engagements that we have scoped. So getting your support and participation in that process will be, I think, crucial to really making sure that we're getting a broad range of feedback and input from the state, across the state. So,
does it make sense to have that as a goal statement, or are that's already baked into our commitment here?
I would turn that around on you guys. Are you comfortable with us adding that as a goal statement? These are your goals.
I would just say, as a member of a local government, I still represent my local government, and I wouldn't want to commit my local government to do something without talking to them first. So I would prefer that we know that that's part of our directive, but not put it in the goals. So that's my opinion.
Okay, understood. Great. Any other changes we want to make to these then, or do these look good? Can we move to voting? All right. If you could throw a fist to 5 in the chat again on these ones. All right, great. You guys are quick with the trigger fingers this time, so thank you for that. Perfect. All right, sounds like we are in agreement on these goals, so that is fantastic. Our next one is reliability. So we had some really good comments come through on the Monday.com on this one, and I've added the second bullet here based on Kirk, what you shared on Monday. So we changed, this was originally, I believe, basically use performance targets rather than prescriptive requirements and specific technology. So we changed that to lead with performance targets and provide options for complementing technology and prescriptive requirements, just to allow a little bit more flexibility there. I think that was a really great suggestion. So thank you for that, Kirk. Kara, you'd also pointed out previously that you didn't think we should include an option for prescriptive requirements at this point. So if we need to have a discussion about that, then let's please do so. And then Christine, I see your hand up. Oh, you're muted.
Darn it. My comment on the reliability ones is that the second and the third one, I think they're great, but I don't think they belong in this section on reliability. I think they might go better in the next one on streamlined process, perhaps. I do think they should stay somewhere, but they're really not related to reliability. In fact, I think kind of the first bullet, you get that at best. And the last two are good compliments to that.
Okay. Do we have anyone that would second moving this to streamlined process, moving those two goals statements?
I'll second that.
Folks generally comfortable with that? I think we can do just a quick thumbs up on that, or shake nodding of heads. Okay, looks like we're good on that. Okay, perfect. I'm just going to make that change here so we can move this down. And we'll discuss those at that point. Perfect. All right, so then we have these three under reliability. Paul, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I want to delve into that first bullet point a little bit. What I hear from my clients, in addition to the concern over reliability, a couple others: maintainability and longevity. So they're very concerned as we go into these new systems that we don't compromise any of those. And there's some concern that some of these systems could be doing that. So those are the two I'd want to add. I know that makes us kind of long, but to me, they are different from reliability. To me, reliability is the likelihood of the system operating on any given day. But the cost and ability to maintain it and how long those systems last are key points that my clients are quite concerned about these days.
That's a great point. I appreciate you bringing that up. Are folks comfortable with us changing this one to say ensure BPS requirements don't adversely affect grid reliability or building reliability, maintainability, or longevity, and consider demand flexibility?
I know that gets to be a mouthful. That's why I hesitate to go there, but to me, they're
a lot of these are a mouthful, so I don't think we need to worry about that too much. I saw one thumbs up. Are folks generally comfortable with that? Anyone not comfortable with it? Okay.
The one thing I might suggest, and I don't know if it applies to Paul's suggestions, which I liked, but this group isn't a bunch of grid operators, and so ensure seems a little strong. I think it's something that we should consider in policy design, right? But I just don't know that we're going to be doing grid planning as part of this process.
So you might not need grid in this one. It could just be building.
That's a good point.
Well, I think we want to include grid in some way, and maybe that becomes a separate bullet because they're kind of different issues. But I think we want to consider how, the larger grid transition that's going on, so we don't I don't know how to say it right, but so that there aren't we're creating solutions that kind of have benefits system-wide. As we're electrifying buildings and our vehicles, we just need to, and as the grid is becoming cleaner, are there solutions that we can deploy in our buildings that support that transition?
I like that, Karen. I like this being two separate bullets. It's making a little more sense now.
Do we want demand flexibility under the bullet addressing buildings or the grid?
Grid.
I heard grid and I heard own, like its own bullet.
Consider demand flexibility seems like its own.
Okay.
I was just going to suggest wording instead of negatively affect. How about compromise? Do not compromise. Just a style.
No, I think that's great. It's a little less aggressive in some ways. So
fewer syllables.
Yeah, that as well. Great. Any other comments, thoughts, concerns about this one?
Where it says consider demand flexibility, I feel like I'm looking for just a little bit more information as to what we're trying to convey with that bullet. Is that demand, peak demand? Is that monthly demand or energy demand?
Could it be ability to participate in smart grid or DR programs?
That's what we're getting at.
As you start electrifying building after building after building, your demand on that grid is going to start. This will get you in that flexibility to keep it. So you might as, that's a great bullet. you need to take into consideration the demand that you're going to ask of that grid or of the building itself. So you can keep it as again, one of those generic bullets that'll get you where you need to go.
So you think better not to have any sort of further explanation on that one? Okay.
Well, is it peak demand at a building level or a grid level? Or both?
I think that they're both, actually, Eric. That's a good point. And I guess I see demand flexibility providing two benefits, like mitigating peaks, both at the building and at the grid level. But I think also enabling, like supporting renewable generation on the grid. So reducing renewable curtailment or increasing renewable utilization.
Some kind of dynamic system.
Yeah. We're probably getting into the weeds too much, you know, but
I think from my perspective in terms of using these as guiding goals, then kind of leaving it a little more vague. I think I tend to agree with Jenny with that.
Exactly. Yep.
That might make a lot of sense because that allows us to then figure out specifically as we're talking about the BPS recommendations, like, you know, what does make sense. So.
And just a style point, if we could say consider demand flexibility at both the building and grid level or building and grid levels, or I don't know.
Sure. Yeah.
A little awkward.
Yeah, definitely. Perfect. Okay. If you could throw your votes for this one into the chat. And we've got just 2 more to go through quickly in our last couple of minutes in this section. So perfect. All right. Our next guiding goals are around cost. So we have consider and promote financing options, including CPACE, utility incentives and funding from state programs and other sources. Provide flexibility within options for compliance, allowing building owners to decide the best path for reaching compliance in their buildings. Encouraging the state to offer incentives for electrification. And then shaping non-compliance penalties in ways that support the business case for improvements. And Christine, I think you suggested in Monday or via email removing that last one if you want to speak to that at all.
Yeah, I think the penalties are dictated in statute, so we can't change the amount of penalties, and I don't think we can change the structure of the penalties either. So the penalties are going to be what they're going to be.
Great point. I would say, Kim, if I see you nodding your head, so it seems like maybe.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's so I think in that case, it does make sense for us to just take that one out since the task force doesn't really have the opportunity to move on that. So Kirk, please go ahead.
Christine, I wonder your thoughts on reframing that bullet that we just deleted as the cost of inaction. I'm curious if that was the intent. So if a building owner doesn't improve their building, what is the market cost, or what is the cost to the building owner for inaction?
Good thought.
So in that case, we would take out penalties, but just say shape non-compliance.
Can we make it a little bit more positive in to support compliance instead of shape non-compliance? And then it's getting away from penalties.
Okay, great. Support compliance in ways that illustrate
Advanced, maybe, or
illustrate the cost of inaction.
Does that work?
I like that.
Great. Nori, please go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was thinking if there's some sort of a way to provide a how-to operating manual for building owners to foster compliance or support compliance, but maybe that 4th bullet already gets to it. creating some sort of how-to operating manual for building owners and maintenance folks to encourage and foster compliance.
Yeah, I love that idea. I wonder if it might be a little more specific than we want to be within a guiding goal, but that's something that I think is definitely worth us talking about when we talk about, you know, programs and ways to support compliance in our future meetings.
Sounds good.
Maybe we can include the word encourage the state to offer resources and incentives.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, those are also jobs, I'll just say, is having not just the state, but there might be cottage industry there for folks who do that.
Great. Michael, go ahead.
Oh, thank you. So the second bullet point on provide flexibility for compliance and the best path. But then the third bullet point is encouraging resources and incentives for electrification. Is that us selecting that one path over all other paths? I'm not sure if there is another path other than electrification because we haven't got there yet, but it seems more specific than the one above on flexibility.
That's a great point. We may want to change this to be encourage the state to offer resources and incentives for, we could either just say compliance, or we could say electrification and other compliance pathways.
I like
just compliance
ending
pathways.
it. Yeah, at just incentives, just stop.
Sure, yeah, just kind of.
I feel like there was a previous conversation that where we were trying to call out a specific incentive, if you will, for electrification. And I guess where I'm thinking of in the second bullet point, the best path for compliance, or maybe it's just making that more plural because there's often more than one path. Because I was thinking about, you know, I might just increase the insulation in my building. I might do lots of building envelope work that really helps the efficiency of my building. And that, you know, if I happen to electrify too, even better. But there are, I like the specific call out to electrification because there is a long-term broader goal about that, I think. That's my 2 cents.
I did add a plural there to paths. We took out the specific reference to electrification. Kim, what are your thoughts on whether calling it out specifically like we had was getting too prescriptive for the state there within that third bullet?
Well, maybe we can just say electrification and other pathways to not make it specifically just electrification. I think obviously that is, we know that likely will be at least one of the pathways. That's an important pathway to meet our greenhouse gas reduction goals. So does that help making it broader like that?
I think that I just wanted to have that discussion because then as a goal statement on costs, that really helps. I'm here representing the construction side, but to the extent we get asked by owners or the design community, what are various pathways that we can get to GHG emission reduction, and then turn around but say there's only incentives for this one, where there might be another one that gets found to be very effective. This kind of leaves it open. So I think that's good for us to just add the 3 words and other pathways.
Perfect. Okay. All right. In the interest of time, I'm going to move us to voting quickly on this one. Kathy and Tracy, I think we are still missing your votes from the last slide. So if you have a chance to throw those in as well. I do think, though, we probably reached 2/3 majority of the group without those. But if you did want to respond to those, that would be great. Perfect. And last set of guiding goals, very quickly, I want to run through these, is streamlined process. So based on Christine, some suggestions that you sent, I removed some language here. This first bullet now just says ensure all requirements are within the control of building. Oops, that should say owners. So I fix that. Perfect. And then we also did move those two from reliability to below to this one. So lead with performance targets and provide options for complementing technology and prescriptive requirements, and avoid the use of excessive variances or exemptions from the BPS. We also have on here, focusing on lower performing buildings, coordinating and collaborating with local programs to avoid duplicative compliance and reporting requirements, including flexibility within interim periods, and reducing administrative burden to building owners. Any broad comments on this one? Joel and then Karen.
My comment is that I think it should be a goal of this task force to avoid adding on to the existing law in ways that negatively affect the building owners tasked with compliance. I think the law is fairly clear on what they need to do, and we should not try and reinterpret that in ways that add to that burden. I think interim goals is maybe one example of that. The law gives them 4 years to 2026 to upgrade their buildings, and then another 4 years after that till 2030 to do their next set of projects. And if we add interim goals, then we're pulling those costs forward for that building owner. And I would see that as being beyond the scope of this task force.
Great. That's a great comment. Do others share that concern? Should we take out this one regarding interim periods, this third bullet here?
Well, the 2026 can be seen as an interim period. But also those are the greenhouse gas targets that we have to meet, 2026 and 2030. But the statute itself is silent on other interim targets there. I think it's fair to stick to 2026 and 2030 though.
If we noted in here that by interim we mean 2026, does that absolve some of the concern there?
I think that helps, but I think the broader issue is we don't want to add unnecessary interpretation to the law that further burdens a building owner.
Great.
And that's just one example of it. But yeah, 2026 makes sense to me.
Okay.
I think that's a good general point. I wouldn't mind if we consider at least that number as interim targets of 2024 and 2027. And if we were able to ensure that our goals still met the target in 2026, we could, in theory, match the same interim targets as Denver for simplicity's sake. I hear what you're saying, Joel, about the bigger picture, though, of not overburdening buildings. I think one advantage of interim targets is that we can be guaranteed that buildings are taking steps in the right direction rather than waiting till December 31st, 2029 and find out that most of them didn't and that we didn't meet our goals.
Does anyone, I know we've got several people with their hands up. Is anyone hoping to speak specifically to that? I'd like to determine if this is something that, how we want to change this bullet before we move on to talking about any other ones.
Just to piggyback off of Christine too, interim targets aren't necessarily regulatory in nature. They could just be kind of like intermediary benchmarks as well. So that could be interpreted a couple different ways, those interim periods.
Yeah, Stacy, did you have something to add?
Hey, I don't want to jump out of turn. I have other comments, but on this particular bullet, I guess I'm a little agnostic to this, how we talk about interim periods or not, but I am really interested in that word flexibility. And it makes me think of some comments that Bill Green has been mentioning. What I think when I read this about include flexibility, I'm thinking about if I have an opportunity to change a piece of equipment today, that is the most important change for my building and for meeting these targets long term, but I happen to increase emissions in the short term, I need flexibility there. We need flexibility and allowance for that building owner to make the appropriate and correct investment today, if that means electrification of a piece of equipment that, you know, for the next couple of years might increase emissions, but ultimately it's the piece of equipment that's going to be there for the next 20 years and ultimately helps to support the target. Am I making sense when I talk about flexibility in that way?
I think that's a good, and I thought of another couple examples about what I think this bullet was trying to get at. For instance, in Denver's, they do have interim goals that you're supposed to meet, but if you say, I'm not going to meet that first interim target because I'm planning to do a huge heating system upgrade the next year, which is going to more than meet the end goal, then they say, okay, yeah, we get where you're coming from there. They also put some prescriptive options in the interim targets, but kept that you still have to meet your absolute final target by 2030. So they added in some flexibility in the meantime to make sure that buildings were still heading in the right direction, that we still firmly met the 2030 goal.
So in the interest of time, I know we have a couple of other comments that people want to make, but we do have a lot of other things to cover in our conversation today, and really getting down into the metrics is an important one. So what I might suggest is, if everyone is comfortable with it, let's continue this conversation specifically on interim periods and that flexibility question and how we want to change the wording of this bullet here. Let's continue that within monday.com if we can. And if you could just either email us if you're not using Monday, that's fine. But if you could either email us what you would suggest new language to be, or put it up into monday.com, then we can start the next meeting with just the quick check-in on this specific set of goal statements. But I do want to make sure that we get to the rest of our conversation for today. Does that sound okay with everyone? And is there any last comments that folks might want to make before we move to discussing this on that venue?
Yeah, if I could just throw out one thing and it particularly hit me as we were talking about the streamlining process part. And that is remembering when we're setting these goals that we're talking not just about buildings along the Front Range that maybe have an easier time, but we're talking about the entire state. And when I was looking at the list, there's a building in Ray, Colorado that's going to have to comply. And how difficult might that be for them? So I just want to make sure we're thinking not just the easy buildings along the Front Range, but those throughout the state that may have more of a challenge.
That's a really great point, Kathy. If you want to just throw any language that you might suggest we change in these goals into Monday or even the chat here today, we'll make sure that's recorded. And we've been working with CCI, Colorado Communities Inc., to make sure that we are also getting the word out and getting input and feedback from some of those more outlying communities as well. So that's definitely, I think that goes back to that engaged and informed community as well, making sure that we have their participation in the process. So perfect. Okay, so we will start meeting 5 with just a quick check-in on the streamlined process so we can get to those. In the meantime, then I think we'll take a quick 5-minute break just so everyone can stretch your legs and look away from your screen to rest your eyes for a couple of minutes. And then we'll come back to discussing specifically the metrics. We'll review our previous conversation quickly, and then we'll break into breakout groups there. So we will come back at 2:33. See you all in just a moment. All right, as you come back, if you wouldn't mind turning your video back on, just giving us a little wave so we know you're here. Awesome. Give it a minute just for a couple more folks to join us, or feel free to just like if you can't turn your video back on, if you're having bandwidth issues and all that, then feel free to just throw like a little thumbs up or a wave in the chat. That's great. Yeah. Hey, Nori. And Kathy, did you have I saw your hand go up for a second there. Did you have a question or comment?
No, I was trying to wave at you, but I failed.
Okay. Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Perfect. Okay, so for the next portion of our meeting, we're really gonna dive deep into metrics. So Diane's gonna take a couple of quick minutes to just go through the different conversations that we had around metrics at our last meeting, just to kind of refresh everyone's memory. And then we're going to split up into breakout rooms. We'll have 20 minutes in the rooms to discuss 3 key questions that we want to get to on metrics, and then we'll come back together, and each of our 4 breakout rooms will report out for a couple of minutes. Following that, our goal is to really get to a set of metrics that we feel comfortable moving forward with as a task force, so we can start talking about the compliance pathways that will help us to meet the objectives and the targets within state statute. So that's our hope here. But Diane, I'll turn it over to you to kind of give an overview of what we've discussed so far, and then we'll go into those breakout rooms.
Perfect. Thanks, Julia. So the purpose of my quick presentation is to really just jog your memory of our last meeting and our conversations around metrics. And it might be helpful to jot down some notes. It's going to seem like a lot of information at once, but my hope is that it kind of jogs your memory and you can kind of recall what was presented to you at the last meeting, and then your thoughts that you shared in the Miro board, if you can remember way back when. So I will start by just presenting. So if you all recall, let me share my screen here. If you all recall, we discussed different aspects of metrics using the Miro board. And there were just different, perfect. So there we had some pros and cons around intensity value and absolute values. And so again, I'm just going to quickly go through these. So some pros that were considered was that this allows for consideration of additional uses or occupants, and that UI is a very easy metric to calculate and understand. But some cons that were stated were both per square foot and total are useful components, but it seems like they are not a combination. There's absent adjustments, including EUI and GHGI. And some communities still don't like using climate change terminology like greenhouse gas emissions. In terms of absolute values, some pros that were stated were that this is the BPS goal. This does need to be reported and tracked. Absolute values seem simple and based on building types. Every building should be interested and encouraged to reduce energy use. On the flip side, total energy needs to differentiate between electricity, site fossil, and site generated renewable energy. And it was stated that it was too complicated to calculate and does not incentivize electrification. The next sections we discussed in the Miro board as a group were source EUI and site EUI. There were no pros noted for source EUI. And the cons that were stated were the greenhouse gas is beyond scope of law. Utility provider would have to align with performance goals. It disincentivizes electrification, and source GHG will change over time as the grid energy source changes. There were lots of pros for site EUI. A lot of them were around simplicity. You could easily provide credits for solar. It can easily be reported via Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and it seems a good fit with the current trajectory approach. Some cons were that it does not account for adjustment based on non-routine events, for example, COVID, and there were some absent adjustments, as stated earlier. Any questions or thoughts on those before I move on to the last section? Is this jogging everyone's memories? Great. Some pros and cons around greenhouse gas intensity and Energy Star Portfolio Manager. So for GHG is that it does align with the ultimate goal, but some cons were that grid GHGs are beyond the scope of law, and compliance outside within the building owners is within the building owner's control. For Energy Star Portfolio Manager, there was discussion around that people know this tool and that it's a trusted tool. If building type has the opportunity to get a score and the score can demonstrate compliance, done. It is something, the automation of entry will increase accuracy and benchmarking compliance. Utility data entry can be automated, increasing reliability of data. So things around reliability and trusting the tool, and that the average person is familiar with Energy Star. Some cons, though, were the PM score does not account for occupancy and process loads. The score is based on site EUI, and it does not reward scope 2 emission reductions nor penalize scope 1 increases. There was a note about there being flaws in reporting, and it disincentivizes electrification. The score is based on more than just energy use, based on a bell curve to some degree. And then there was a note about ensuring that inputs are accurately represent building use, because Energy Star requires third-party verification. Not all building types are covered in Energy Star Portfolio Manager. And then I also wanted to bring up these next two slides were from the presentation that IMT and MBI gave. There are also just some resources from EPA that were pulled in there about different strengths and weaknesses around certain metrics. So the hope is that, again, it'll be important that you're pulling out information that you feel is important to you, but I also should have mentioned that that's also relevant to other communities. I think it was Kathy made a good point about not just thinking about buildings you own and manage, but also different communities, remembering that this is a statewide metric. So again, there's lots of text on these slides. So hopefully you guys are all familiar with these based on the last meeting and some homework. But just some high level strengths of the Energy Star score. So as stated from the Mira board, that it's a recognizable logo, it's trusted by people and folks already use it. The weaknesses, there's quite a few there. Some building types do not qualify for Energy Star scores. Other things like some inputs are difficult to verify, so that was stated above, that might cause inaccurate or falsified data. And another note is the score does not always correspond to actual performance level. So some things to consider. For site EUI, the strengths are that there are relatively few measurements to make. The owner can calculate energy use intensity directly from energy bills, and it does apply to all building types. Some weaknesses around site EUI stated are that not all site energy is equal, and whether normalization would need to be applied. For source EUI, this does apply to all building types, and it corresponds to emissions more than site energy. Some weaknesses are ESPM doesn't yet normalize, and national site to source multiplier doesn't reflect local conditions. So there's that piece about national versus local. Greenhouse gas intensity, the strengths are that it most directly ties BPS to greenhouse gas reduction commitments, and it enables comparison of building specific greenhouse gas emissions. Some weaknesses are energy to GHG conversion factors are complex and highly time dependent and rapidly changing. Individual building performance is more difficult to compare year over year if the coefficients change, and ESPM does not yet normalize. So I wanted to quickly open it up to some questions if you need some clarification on any of those. And there's also some great conversation in the chat to clarify some things as well.
Yeah, Kara makes a great point in the chat that we can use Portfolio Manager as tracking tool without being locked into using the Portfolio Manager score. So it's still a very useful tool. So we just want to note that.
Great.
This is Mark. I've participated in a webinar today on how Portfolio Manager actually calculates GHG emissions. And right now they are currently working on an external calculator that you can enter in the local market-based emissions factors instead of using their regional factors built in. It will not be part of Portfolio Manager per se, but you can take the output of Portfolio Manager and adjust it to local conditions. That should be available. They couldn't provide a date, but sometime in Q2 of next year.
Great. Thanks, Mark.
There's also a couple of other points in here that were not, that I disagreed with.
For energy source specifically?
Actually, one, you're saying uses a national site source conversion factor. If that's your emissions basis, no, the emissions is based on a regional factor. We're in the Rocky Mountain Power Authority region, or MPA. That will change, and they update that every 2 years. But it's a region wide, which for us is statewide. It's basically Colorado and part of Wyoming.
And that gets to what Kim mentioned when we discussed the statute, that that we can that the state is looking into, how we can apply more localized emissions factors as well. So
whether you can adjust the emissions on a portfolio basis, should be able to, instead of just on a per building basis. But if you have different mixtures, you'd have to subdivide your groupings into those utilities or whatever the logical grouping is.
And John makes a good point too, so that'll be part of our discussion after this as well. Any other kind of clarifications or just words before we break up into small groups and discuss these a little bit further? We want to be sure that you all have the information needed in order to participate in the discussion and potentially vote on these metrics. So there's no silly questions.
Can I just ask one clarifying question? I don't think what you haven't covered here is the other half of what Denver has required, which is that we just require that equipment, when replaced, if cost effective, is replaced with a heat pump. I know that Colorado is a home rule state, but have you looked at if there's any options where the state has the ability, because these are all performance-based metrics, but that's not the only way to reach these performance goals. And so before we just narrow in on performance metrics versus other policies that can reach these same performance goals, can you confirm or summarize what ability the state has to regulate specific equipment?
Yeah, Kim, do you have?
I can jump in. Yeah, I think we'll discuss this more during the breakout rooms. That is going to be one of the questions. And I think there is still the question as to whether or not we could do that, because obviously we're not, the state does not oversee local building permitting. And it would be tough for us to, unless the building is providing some documentation to us, along with installing new equipment, it'd be tough for us to actually monitor or enforce that, I think.
But you can set minimum code requirements that local jurisdictions have to adopt. Isn't that correct? And so could that be a factor? I just wondered if you could give us more clear direction on what is and isn't possible there. And we can just do that in breakouts too.
Although I could speak a little bit to that. There was specific legislation in 2019 that established state minimum requirements for local building codes. And in order to go beyond that, we would likely require additional legislation. And in fact, there is conversation happening in the governor's budget request for this year included the funding that would be required as part of an advanced energy codes bill to update that legislation. But under current legislation does not allow us to go beyond that those requirements created in 2019. from a building code perspective.
And so this task force and the AQCC couldn't direct a change in building code is what I hear you telling me. That would have to be new legislation.
That's correct.
And Kate had a question in the chat. For the other states with BPS standards legislation, are they all using Energy Star or a variety of metrics?
You want me to answer that? I could take a stab at that if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
The only other state that has a BPS is Washington State, and they use site EUI. There are several local jurisdictions that have a BPS. Denver is one, and they also use site EUI. Montgomery County is just finalizing theirs, and they use a site EUI. New York City uses a greenhouse gas-based one. Washington, D.C. uses Energy Star score, and St. Louis uses site EUI, right? I want to say
it's site.
Thank you, Christine. Joel, let's take your last question and then let's go into breakout rooms after that.
Very specific question. I see in the chat that site EUI can be weather normalized. Question is, can it also be occupancy normalized?
it can't in the tool. It can't in Energy Star Portfolio Manager, but that is something they've said they're working on. They didn't have a date for when that would be added, but they've heard from a lot of different folks that they would like that capability to be added.
And for example, in Denver, until that capability is added, that is one of the ways that a building will take an alternate compliance path if they need to adjust their EUI for occupancy. There's a path to do that, and we'll endeavor to make that as easy as possible for building occupancies where that's just really kind of should be pretty plug and play. If you look at a call center in an office building that's operating 24 hours a day, that should be a pretty standard adjustment that shouldn't be hard to make.
Thanks, Katrina.
All right. Well, great. So we have a list of questions that we'll be going over in the chat. So myself, Diane, Kim, and Crystal will each be kind of facilitating each of these conversations, but the goal is for each of you to really share your thoughts and responses. As I mentioned, our hope is that by the end of our time together in these small group conversations, that we have a metric or two or three that the small group feels makes the most sense for the BPS for Colorado. And then we'll come back together and report out, and then hopefully have time to vote on a metric, but we're running a little bit behind. So it is 2:51 right now. So we will have 20 minutes in those breakout rooms, and then 10 minutes to report out. And then I think we'll probably not have time for voting on a metric at this point, but that'll let us stew on it a little bit, and we can start that at the next meeting as well. So we'll start with those streamlined process goals and the metric here. So perfect. So Kim, if you want to send out the breakout room invites, great. And facilitators, don't forget to please record your breakout rooms.
So we're the first ones back to the main group. Is that what that means? Okay. Oh, here we go.
People
Got
are
it.
starting to come back now.
There we go.
All right, great. I think we've got everyone joining back. My dog is barking a lot in the background. Is that distracting for folks? Can y'all hear that? I think we're getting a package delivered. So he might stop here. Okay, I think he stopped. So I'm just gonna pass it over to Diane if he was gonna keep going. But great, we had a really good conversation in our small group. So we've got just a few minutes left. If we could quickly, maybe in just under a minute or two each, for each group report out on kind of what determination your group made. Those determinations, what we'll do is we'll roll them into sort of our working document that we're going to share with you all. So we're putting together a working document that basically says, as a task force, these are all the things that we've talked about and decided so far. So we'll put those in there and share them with you all. And then we'll start the next meeting with the conversation of, of these different ideas, which makes the most sense. But quickly, we'll just go through group by group. And if one of the task force members could report out in a minute or two on kind of what determination your group made. So first, we've got Kim's group with Katrina, Tracy, Cecil, and Nori.
Thanks. And Eric actually volunteered to report out, so I'll have him do
Sure. Well, the census is to go with the site EUI as the main metric, we believe, but we also feel sensitive to the fact that it kind of loses track of greenhouse gas reduction intent. So we're not yet sure how we're going to incorporate that into this solution, but we think source is probably the right path to be heading down.
Source
I mean,
EUI?
Site.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, site. Thank you, site.
Yep.
Great. Thanks, Eric. The next group was Crystal's group. So Kirk, John, Karen, and Paul.
All right, Crystal, I'll take a shot at this and then you fill in the blanks, okay? We're voting for, or sorry, not voting. We are interested in the site EUI as a metric that is easily communicated to building owners and ease of access, being able to easily transition and work with owners with the initial adoption of this program. There were concerns on how, we discussed absolute GHG versus site EUI. And again, to Eric's point, I think we also kind of share that sentiment of how does this connect back to the long-term goal. Also thinking about some of our long-term strategies around decarbonization and electrification. Not really sure how EUI is going to fare over the long run, over the long haul, and if that is going to be truly the best incentive for building owners to hit that. What we know from other cities and what we believe in our group is there isn't a one, this isn't a one size fits all. There isn't one target that is going to solve all of our problems here. But we're not interested in looking at multiple targets. And so again, from ease of access, the site EUI is going to be best. And then also, Karen really expressed a lot of interest around making sure that there is education for building owners and making sure that we can easily communicate this in a non-technical way.
Great, thanks, Kirk. Kara for our group.
To go, and Bill, feel free to jump in. We also landed on site EUI, and if we could do that in a way that doesn't encourage electric resistance heating, that would be great. And we were thinking potentially also broken out by use types, with some caveats there around tricky buildings like hospitals and data centers. We talked about an addition, like a supporting compliance requirement that would get to electrification, potentially at the point of equipment turnover. And we also talked about maybe a voluntary compliance pathway. If you electrify with heat pumps, maybe you're in compliance and you could avoid kind of further further upgrades to your building. And then we talked just very briefly, kind of a compliance pathway for demand flexibility in buildings, just storage or smart controls or something. I don't know if it's prescriptive or performance-based, whatever that looks like. And I think we too had kind of a caution around greenhouse gas as the metric just due to the complexity, but recognize that that does best align with the goals that we need to achieve. Team, Bill, anything else?
Well, and I think we talked about using the greenhouse gas measure from portfolio manager as an alternate compliance path potentially. You know, there are issues around that, but it might be good.
Great, thanks, team. And Diane, your group.
Yeah, sorry, you'll hear from me. I'll be reporting out. I didn't give them enough time to think about who will report out, but I had a great group: Stacy, Christine, I think Kate, Tracy, who am I missing, and Joel. So great group. We discussed a lot about site UI as thinking that would be a great main metric for plenty of reasons that were already stated. But also with the caveat of in future meetings discussing that flexibility and some alternative pathways will be critical. And normalizing for weather, building use, occupancy, and then EVs. So we want to definitely be sure that we're considering those as we develop compliance pathways and alternative pathways. The other thing that was, and Michael was in our group too, but Michael mentioned also like aligning with Denver will allow for a streamlined process. So that was also how we based our recommendations. Did I miss anything?
And just a follow-up comment on building use, the example was used that the trajectory for improvements in a hospital might be different than office buildings. So there might be a chance for us to look at that down the road.
Right, definitely.
Yeah, it sounds like Kim just put in the chat, it sounds like we're kind of all in agreement on site UI, recognizing that there's probably some alternative compliance pathways, which we'll be discussing in the next few meetings. So that's perfect. So we do have a quick minute to do a fist of 5 on using site UI, knowing that we can really dive into, you know, the different metrics or targets for various building types and being able to normalize for weather and occupancy and other issues, and also alternative compliance pathways in future meetings. So with that, can we get a quick show of fist of 5 on using site UI as our metric for Colorado's BPS?
Well, Julia, I think we also recognize that site UI alone is missing some of the goals of greenhouse gas reduction. So I'm not sure that we can quite say site UI just yet. I feel like we have more to bring to the table that is going to bring in that greenhouse gas component. So that's my take on it.
I went back and just double check the interpretation of the state language. And so let me just read a couple of points here in point 1. Okay. So the reductions are the total emissions, not normalized to a square foot basis. So they need to take into account an increase in the number of square footage of covered buildings between now and 2030. So we need to also consider the projections of growth in the number of buildings during this time. The second point is that in bullet number 3, the statute is designed to incentivize actions by building owners, not actions by utilities. So earlier I heard a discussion that, you know, some of the reductions will be achieved through the greening of the grid, but this interpretation clearly states that we don't take that into account, because it says electric utilities have separate emissions reductions obligations, blah, blah, blah. It is important not to double count these emissions reductions. So again, we need to come back to incentivize the building owner. So I'm changing my opinion somewhat, not that I'm a voting member, but I am now leaning more towards site EUI instead of source for this very reason. So we can't, well, we're not supposed to be taking credit for actions taken by the utilities. So
And I wanted to mention too, that whole sector thing, it resonated with me that we're talking about building owners, operators contributing to a sector being reduced. So I agree with my.
Okay, great. Thank you both.
I think we could still be in a place to do the FIST to 5 on using site UI as the primary metric. And then I think, like Julia was saying, discuss alternate pathways and additional flexibility in the next call. And it was kind of my understanding that we could let the math nerds do the back end work on converting the site UI that building owners would deal with to making sure that the whole process reaches the statewide goals.
That's and that's my understanding as well. Thank you, Christine. So with that, I think let's do a quick FIST to 5 on using site UI. So the question is, are we comfortable with using site UI as our primary metric for a building performance standard for the state of Colorado, knowing that we will likely also have some alternative compliance pathways that we'll get into a little bit more in future meetings. So yeah, please go ahead and throw that in the chat. Perfect.
Great. And as we're voting, I'll make sure we capture all that. Thanks. I just wanted to, oh, Julia, I'll let you kind of close up a little bit, and then I just want to make sure we ask a couple questions before we let people go.
Yeah, thanks. Well, I just wanted to note that it's been so fun to have these conversations with you all. I'm going to be stepping out for the next couple of months, going on maternity leave, starting in mid-January. So you'll be in obviously great hands with the CO team and Diane, and we'll have another Lotus team member stepping in my absence. But if you don't see my face for a couple months, that is why. And then I look forward to working with you again in the late spring. So send it back over to you, Diane.
Thanks, Julia. You will be missed, but you will be on this great journey. I'm excited, little baby. Great. So I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about the next meeting, and then we wanted to end with a couple questions for you all to consider, and then I'll follow up in Monday.com. But at our next meeting, we'll have Iconergy presenting on benchmarking data. We'll also have Overlay presenting on the covered buildings list. So what we would love is if we could get questions beforehand for both of those groups so that we can be sure we're efficient in those presentations at the next meeting. So between now and our next meeting, be thinking about questions for Overlay on the covered buildings list and Iconergy on the benchmarking data. And so what I'll do is I'll start a chat stream on Monday.com. So feel free to add your questions there. We will also be sharing, we did hear back, so meeting number 3, we had IMT and NBI present, and then you all had some great questions for them to follow up on. So I will share the responses to your questions from them also in Monday.com. And then, as I think the last thing is, we've been talking a little bit about having some sort of living document so we can have a way for us to record and share information via a Google Doc. So that will also be presented to you all prior to meeting number 5. The last point I want to make is a lot of you all have been talking a lot about public engagement and how are we going to get different community voices and different groups of people getting their input on this BPS. And so in January, we will be presenting on the plan for that. We've been kind of planning behind the scenes, so know that we've been hearing from you all in terms of great groups to reach out to and different needs that you may have in order to connect with different communities. And so we'll be presenting that in January as well. So really looking forward to continuing these conversations. We made great progress today, and I will follow up with the meeting notes, the presentation from today, and then all the things I just shared with you all. So.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. And look at us finishing right on time today. So enjoy your holidays. Happy New Year. And looking forward to connecting with you all again soon. And we'll see you on Monday.com. And we're happy to stick around if there's additional questions or concerns. Kim, we're going to